All right, strap in, everyone. We're diving deep into one of the most pivotal moments in modern history, the Chinese Civil War. Specifically, we're looking at 1946 to 1949.
Ah, yes, the years that decided the fate of China.
Exactly. We've got stacks of notes here, textbook excerpts, even some juicy historical analysis. We're going to unpack how the CCP secured victory and what challenges they faced after the dust settled.
And it's a story that's full of surprises. When we think about the CCP's win, it seems almost inevitable in hindsight.
Yeah, like it was destined to happen.
But back in 1946, the situation was anything but certain.
Really? From what I've read, it sounds like the Nationalists, the GMD, were feeling pretty confident at the start. More troops, better equipment, U.S. backing.
Oh, they were definitely feeling themselves.
Like they had it in the bag.
Pretty much, and they went straight for the jugular, targeting Manchuria and Yan'an.
Why were those spots so crucial? Was it just about strategic location?
Location was part of it, but it was also about resources and symbolism. Manchuria was an industrial powerhouse. Whoever controlled it had a huge economic advantage.
So the GMD wanted to cripple the CCP economically right from the start.
Exactly. And then there was Yan'an. That was the CCP's heartland, their base of operations. Taking it was a major symbolic victory for the GMD. It was meant to demoralize the CCP and force them onto the defensive.
Okay, so the CCP is suddenly the underdog, almost a David versus Goliath situation. And I'm guessing that's where their famous guerrilla warfare tactics come in.
You got it. Manchuria, with its rugged terrain, hills, and forests, was perfect for that kind of fighting.
So the CCP used the landscape to their advantage.
Absolutely. Ambushes, hit-and-run tactics, constantly harassing the enemy. They wore the GMD down using the terrain as their ally.
Smart. But they didn't just stick to one strategy, did they? My research shows they were constantly evolving, adapting.
That's one of the keys to their success, their adaptability. By 1947, the CCP was already shifting towards more conventional warfare. They started incorporating infantry and artillery into their tactics, and it really threw the GMD off balance.
So they were keeping the GMD guessing.
All the time. And they started racking up wins. They took key cities like Luoyang and Kaifeng, which disrupted the GMD's control and cut off their supply lines.
It's like they were playing chess while the GMD were stuck playing checkers.
A perfect analogy. And then, bam, 1948-49, it's a complete domino effect. Major cities start falling one after another. Beijing, Nanjing, Shanghai.
It sounds like a whirlwind. Was this rapid collapse a shock to everyone back then?
Absolutely. Most people expected a long, drawn-out conflict. But the CCP's momentum was unstoppable, and the GMD's weaknesses were just becoming too much to bear. It led to a much faster victory than anyone anticipated. And it all culminated in October 1949 with the establishment of the People's Republic of China.
Victory for the CCP. Champagne popping, confetti falling. But I bet it wasn't all smooth sailing from there.
Oh, not at all. In fact, they faced a mountain of challenges right from the get-go.
Like what?
Well, for starters, Tibet was pushing for independence. Taiwan remained under GMD control. And even within the CCP's newly claimed territories, there were divisions and pockets of resistance.
So, a nation in pieces, both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, the economy was in ruins. Years of warfare had destroyed infrastructure, disrupted agriculture. It's hard to overstate the scale of the devastation.
Wow, so the CCP had their work cut out for them.
Absolutely. They inherited a country that was deeply divided, economically shattered, and facing threats from both within and outside its borders. It's a testament to the resilience and determination that they were able to not only survive, but thrive in the face of such adversity.
Okay, so we've seen how the CCP clinched the win on the battlefield, but it sounds like their victory was about much more than just military might.
Right. The sources we've looked at make it clear that military and political factors were crucial to the CCP's success.
So let's break those down, starting with the military side. Honestly, some of the tactics they used were straight out of a strategy guide.
Well, their early reliance on guerrilla warfare was undeniably effective, especially in the context of Manchuria's challenging terrain. But what's even more impressive is how they adapted their tactics over time, shifting to more conventional warfare when the situation demanded it.
They were always one step ahead.
Exactly. While the GMD seemed rigid and predictable, the CCP was constantly evolving, keeping their opponents off balance. It was a brilliant display of strategic thinking and adaptability.
And then there's the leadership factor. On one side, we have Lin Biao for the CCP, a seasoned general, and on the other, Jiang Jieshi for the GMD. What made Lin Biao such an effective commander?
Well, he was a veteran who had fought against the Japanese, so he had experience in both guerrilla and conventional warfare. Plus, he was a master strategist and a skilled tactician. He knew how to motivate his troops and inspire confidence in his leadership. Jiang, on the other hand,
Not so much.
he was a much more cautious and indecisive leader. He often struggled to make tough calls and delegated authority poorly. This made the GMD much less agile and responsive to the CCP's dynamic strategies. It was a clash of styles, and Lin Biao's approach proved to be far more effective in the long run.
Now, the sources also talk a lot about morale and discipline. Were those really that important? I mean, it's war, right? Everyone's got to be a little rough around the edges.
You might think so, but there was a stark contrast between the two armies in terms of morale and discipline. CCP troops were known for their strong sense of purpose and unwavering commitment to their cause.
They weren't just fighting for a paycheck.
No, they truly believed in what they were fighting for, and this belief translated into discipline, both on and off the battlefield. They were known for treating civilians with respect, which helped them gain popular support in areas they controlled.
So it was about winning hearts and minds as much as territory.
Exactly. The CCP understood that a successful revolution required more than just military history. They needed the people on their side. Meanwhile, the GMD struggled with issues like corruption, poor treatment of their soldiers, and a general lack of discipline. This inevitably eroded their morale and made it much harder to garner public support.
So while the GMD was stumbling, the CCP was building a reputation, almost like a brand. It's like two different Chinas were emerging.
That's a great way to put it. The CCP was crafting a narrative, a vision for a new China that resonated, particularly with the peasantry. They were offering hope and a sense of purpose, something that the GMD, with its corruption and internal divisions, simply couldn't match.
And at the heart of this appeal, it seems, was land reform. From my reading, that was a real game changer. But I got to be honest, some of the details in the sources are, unsettling.
Yeah, land reform was a radical policy, no doubt about it. And it wasn't always peaceful. It involved forced seizures of land from wealthy landlords and redistribution to poor peasants.
So it wasn't exactly a gentle process.
No, it could be quite brutal at times. There were struggles, violence, even executions. It was a messy, chaotic period, and it definitely raises questions about the means justifying the ends.
Yeah, it makes you think about the cost of revolution, the human cost.
Absolutely. But for the millions who had suffered under oppressive landlords for generations, land reform was seen as a necessary evil, a way to finally break free from the chains of poverty and exploitation. And the CCP capitalized on that sentiment brilliantly. They weren't just giving away land, they were creating a new social order, one that promised equality and justice for the downtrodden masses.
It was a powerful message.
And they spread it far and wide. The CCP were masters of propaganda. They used posters, rallies, even theater productions to portray themselves as liberators, fighting for a new China free from corruption and foreign influence. They were building a new national identity, a new story for China to tell itself.
And it seems like it worked. They won over millions of hearts and minds.
They did. And this carefully crafted narrative stood in stark contrast to the GMD's failings.
Speaking of the GMD, it feels like they made some major blunders, almost like they were shooting themselves in the foot.
Well, they certainly weren't doing themselves any favors. Their failure to deliver on their three principles, nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood, was a huge blow to their credibility.
So lots of promises, not a lot of follow-through, classic political move. But what did that mean for the average person? How did these broken promises actually impact their lives?
Well, imagine you're a peasant in 1948. You've just gotten land thanks to the CCP. But then the GMD pushes back, trying to reclaim the territory. What do? Do you fight for your new life? Or risk losing everything? It was a real dilemma for millions of people. And on top of that, the GMD was riddled with corruption. Local officials often prioritized self-enrichment over serving the people. This meant inflated prices, scarce food, a government that seemed completely out of touch with the needs of ordinary Chinese.
No wonder people were flocking to the CCP's banner. They were offering something tangible, something to believe in.
And something to fear, too. One of the chilling details that emerges from the sources is the fear of landlord revenge.
Yeah, that really stuck with me. It adds a whole other layer of complexity to the story.
In areas recaptured by the GMD, landlords often took brutal revenge on those who had participated in land reform. They seized back their land, they meted out violence, even carried out executions. It was a terrifying prospect, and it pushed many further into the CCP's camp, seeing them as the only force capable of protecting them from such a fate.
It really highlights the human cost of this conflict, the very real dangers people faced, and the impossible choices they had to make. It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about real people caught in the crossfire.
Absolutely. And the Chinese Civil War was a conflict that touched the lives of millions, shaping their destinies and leaving scars that would endure for generations to come.
It's fascinating how even amidst a brutal war, the CCP were planting the seeds for their vision of a new China. Like they were playing a long game, thinking 10 steps ahead.
Yeah, that strategic thinking, always planning for the future, that was a major strength of theirs.
So let's shift gears for a bit. Let's talk about the aftermath. Okay, they win the war, but then what? They've got this fractured nation to put back together. China, in 1949, it was basically a giant puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Yeah, like hitting the reset button on an entire country, decades of conflict, infrastructure destroyed, the economy in shambles,
Yeah.
and those deep regional divisions you mentioned earlier.
Tibet and Taiwan, those are the big ones. But the sources I've got also point to divisions within the CCP's own territory. It wasn't just a North versus South thing.
Absolutely. It wasn't as simple as the CCP marching in and everyone saying, okay, we're good, let's do this. There was a mix of everything. Hope, fear, suspicion. People weren't sure what to expect.
So it wasn't all victory parades and celebration.
Not exactly. There were pockets of resistance, people who'd benefited from the old system who weren't ready to give up their power. The CCP had to work and sometimes fight to establish its authority.
Consolidating power. It's never easy.
Especially when you've got a country that's basically been turned upside down.
And let's not forget the economic mess. I mean, wow, your sources painted a pretty bleak picture.
Bleak might be putting it mildly. We're talking half the railway lines destroyed, rivers clogged with sunken ships, power stations out of commission. Industrial production had basically flatlined, agriculture was in chaos, food shortages everywhere.
Trying to get the country back on its feet must felt like an impossible task.
It was a Herculean effort, for sure. Just keeping the country running, keeping people fed, that was their first priority.
So I've got political divides, economic ruin. It sounds like they inherited a country on the brink of collapse. And then there's the human cost, which is almost too much to think about.
Yeah, the human cost of any war is immeasurable. Millions dead, families torn apart, an entire generation scarred by violence and loss. It's a heavy burden for any nation to carry.
So the CCP find themselves in charge of this mess. What were their priorities? Where do you even begin to fix something like that?
Well, the first order of business was establishing control, asserting their authority, making it clear that they were the ones in charge now.
And how did they go about doing that? Was it all about force, or was there some strategy involved?
It was a combination of things. They used military force to quell rebellions and deal with those who refused to cooperate.
So stick, definitely.
But they also used political maneuvering, removing opponents from positions of power, installing loyal CCP members in their place.
Wow.
And of course, propaganda played a huge role. They needed to win over the hearts and minds of the people to convince them that the CCP was the best, the only path forward for China.
A little bit of everything then.
They understood that true power wasn't just about military might. It was about having the support, or at least the acceptance, of the people. They needed to create a sense of unity, a shared purpose, if they were going to rebuild the country.
Okay, so they're working on the political and social side of things, but what about the economic mess? How did they tackle that?
Well, their approach was pretty radical. They basically overhauled the entire economic system.
From ground up.
Pretty much. They implemented a series of sweeping reforms, collectivized agriculture, nationalized industries, centralized economic planning. It was a complete break from the past.
Hold on, break that down a bit. Collectivized agriculture. What does that even mean?
It meant that farmers who had previously owned their own land had to pool their resources and work together on collective farms.
So no more private ownership.
Not for the most part. And the same thing happened with industries. Businesses were brought under state control, and the government decided what was produced, how much, and for whom.
It sounds like a massive shift. How did people react to that?
It was a mixed bag, as you can imagine. Some people embraced the changes, seeing them as a necessary step towards a more just and equitable society.
But others?
Others were less enthusiastic. Many farmers were resistant to giving up their land, and business owners weren't thrilled about having their companies nationalized. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty as people tried to adapt to this new way of life.
So a period of huge upheaval then.
Absolutely. It was a time of immense change, both for the country as a whole and for individual people. The CCP had won the war, but the real battle, the battle to build a new China, was just beginning.
So we've got this fractured China trying to piece itself back together. But looming over everything is the Cold War. It's like the world's biggest chessboard, and China's right in the middle of it all.
And the superpowers were definitely making their moves.
Speaking of superpowers, let's talk about the U.S. and their support for the GMD. Why were they so invested in Jiang Jiechi? They didn't exactly have a history of friendship.
It boils down to one word, really: containment. The U.S. was terrified of communism spreading, and they saw Jiang as their best bet to stop it in Asia.
So they poured money into his regime, hoping he'd be a strongman against communism.
Exactly. Billions of dollars, hoping to prop him up as a bulwark against the communist tide.
But it seems like a risky bet that didn't pay off. All that support, and Jiang still lost. What went wrong?
Well, it was the early days of the Cold War, remember? The U.S. was still figuring out its strategy, and they definitely made some missteps. They overestimated Jiang's strength, underestimated the CCP's appeal, and they failed to see just how corrupt and ineffective the GMD really was.
Like trying to fix a sinking ship with duct tape.
A perfect analogy. As the GMD's weaknesses became more and more obvious, U.S. support started to dwindle. By 1948, they pretty much washed their hands of the whole thing.
Okay, so while the GMD was going down, the CCP had their own powerful ally, the Soviet Union. But you mentioned earlier it wasn't always smooth sailing between them.
Right. It wasn't exactly a perfect communist brotherhood. The USSR gave them training, weapons, even some captured Japanese equipment. But behind the scenes, there was tension between Stalin and Mao.
It's like one of those families that smile for the holiday photo but are secretly at each other's throats.
Exactly. Stalin saw Mao as a potential rival, someone who might challenge his authority in the communist world. And Mao, well, he wasn't exactly known for taking orders from anyone.
So how much did this Soviet support actually help the CCP? Were they just puppets of Moscow?
It definitely played a role, especially in the early stages, but it wasn't the deciding factor. The CCP won because they understood the needs and grievances of the Chinese people. They offered a compelling alternative to the GMD, and they were incredibly effective at mobilizing popular support.
So foreign powers played a role, but ultimately the CCP's success was homegrown.
Absolutely. And that's a key takeaway. The Chinese Civil War wasn't just some regional conflict. It was a clash of ideologies, a struggle for the future of China, and it had ripple effects that were felt across the entire world.
Ripples that we're still feeling today.
Without a doubt. The decisions made, the battles fought, the lives lost during that period, they continue to shape China's relationship with the world, its internal politics, its place on the global stage.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Chinese Civil War, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the biggest lesson is that history is never truly over. It shapes who we are, how we see the world, and the choices we make. The echoes of the past are always present, whether we realize it or not.
That's a powerful thought. And the Chinese Civil War is a perfect example of that. It wasn't just a war, it was a turning point, a moment that set in motion forces that continue to shape the world we live in today.
And the story doesn't end there. What happened after the war, how the CCP consolidated power, the successes and failures of their rule, that's a whole other story waiting to be told.
Exactly. And for you, our listeners, that's where the real journey begins. We've given you the map, now it's up to you to explore the territory. Keep digging, keep questioning, keep learning. Because the more we understand the past, the better equipped we are to navigate the present and shape the future.